The ballroom was glowing under the soft light of glittering chandeliers. Crystal glasses sparkled on the tables, and the air smelled of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. People in fine suits and elegant dresses were moving around, laughing and talking about the latest news, business deals, and social gossip. Everything about the night felt perfect, polished, and carefully planned. Among all this elegance, a young waitress moved quietly through the crowd. She carried a tray of drinks, her uniform plain and simple, her shoes worn at the edges. She moved fast but carefully, making sure no one spilled anything. While everyone around her seemed to be enjoying themselves in the world of luxury, she lived in a very different world, one filled with hard work and long hours. But she didn't complain. She had learned early on that the world doesn't pause for anyone, and respect had to be earned quietly. As she went from table to table, pouring champagne and offering canapes. Her eyes kept drifting toward the grand piano at the far corner of the ballroom. It was polished to a shine, with golden accents that caught the light. She had passed it many times, but tonight, something inside her made her heart beat faster. The guests noticed her looking at the piano. Some of them chuckled quietly, whispering to each other. One man, leaning back in his chair, smirked and said something loud enough for a few around him to hear. "Do you think she can even play a single note?" Laughter followed, soft but clear, and it made her cheeks heat up. She felt the sting, but she didn't let it stop her. She had always known people judged by appearance first and talent later, or sometimes never at all. Despite the laughter, she walked toward the piano. Every step felt heavy, like the world was watching her and waiting for her to fail. She reached the bench, and for a moment she paused. Her hands hovered above the keys, and she could feel the smooth wood under her fingers. It had been years since she last played in front of anyone. But she remembered the feeling, the quiet power of music. How it could touch hearts and tell stories words never could. The crowd's laughter was still there, soft but present. Some of them were leaning closer now, curiosity mixing with mockery. The waiter who had helped set up the piano gave her a quick, sympathetic nod, and she took a deep breath. She reminded herself that she wasn't here for approval or applause. She was here to share something real, something she loved, no matter what anyone thought. Then she sat down and rested her fingers lightly on the keys. The laughter from the crowd faded a little, replaced by whispers of surprise. A few guests raised their eyebrows, wondering what she would do next. The moment felt frozen, like the entire ballroom was holding its breath. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the quiet settle over her. Then she pressed a key. The sound was soft but clear, delicate as a drop of water hitting a still pond. It surprised some people, made others pause. She smiled to herself, feeling the familiar flow of music returning to her. The piano seemed to respond to her touch as if it had been waiting for this moment. The first notes spread slowly across the room, simple and gentle. The crowd, who had been so ready to laugh, stopped for a moment. Eyes turned toward her, some in disbelief. She didn't rush. She let each note sink in, letting the music speak before her fingers moved faster and more confidently. It was strange how a room full of rich, fancy people could feel so small and quiet when someone played with truth in their heart. She could feel the change in the air, the shift in attention, as if every whisper, every smirk, was being replaced by something more honest. Music doesn't lie, she thought, and tonight it would show them what she had always known. Even though the laughter had not completely gone, it had lost its sharp edge. The crowd was starting to notice that this was not a performance they had expected. Something unusual was happening, something that made the usual chatter seem trivial. And she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. As she pressed the keys, the soft, gentle notes began to fill the room. At first, the sound was timid, almost shy, but it was beautiful. It was as if the piano had a story to tell, and she was the only one who could make it speak. The people who had been laughing moments ago now froze. Some stopped talking mid-sentence, glasses halfway to their lips. Their eyes turned toward her, curious, confused, and a little uneasy. She kept her eyes closed, letting the music flow from her heart to her fingers. She remembered every hour she had spent practicing in quiet rooms, hidden from the world. No one had seen her play when she was young. There was no teacher, no audience, only the piano and her determination. Every note carried that hard work, every melody carried her dreams. Slowly, the melody began to grow. It was still soft, but now it carried emotion, a mixture of hope, sadness, and something magical that made people lean in closer. A few of the guests whispered to each other, unsure of what they were witnessing. The laughter had completely vanished. The rich, polished crowd, used to being entertained by orchestras and professionals, could not believe what they were hearing. Her fingers moved faster now, but each note was precise, full of feeling. The piano seemed to respond to her, resonating with every touch. She played not for applause, not for approval, but because she had to. Music was her truth, and in that moment it was more powerful than any insult or doubt. From the back of the room, a man who had been particularly loud in mocking her before now sat upright, eyes wide. He had expected a joke, a poor attempt at performance, but instead, he heard something that made him stop breathing for a moment. Around him, other guests leaned forward, trying to see the small figure at the piano and comprehend what they were hearing. The melody shifted now, from something soft and delicate to something deeper and more expressive. It told stories without words, of struggle, of dreams, of moments of quiet triumph. She played with passion, pouring her entire life into the music. Every person in the room could feel it. The people who had been laughing, sneering, and whispering were now captivated. Some eyes glistened with tears. One woman clutched her hand to her chest, as if the music had reached inside and pulled out something she had forgotten existed. Others sat silently, mouths slightly open, hearts racing in ways they had not expected. The room, once filled with chatter and pretension, was now wrapped in an almost sacred silence. Even the staff, usually busy with serving and cleaning, stopped for a moment to listen. The piano, a simple instrument to the guests, had become a bridge between worlds. The world of the wealthy and the world of someone who worked quietly and humbly, yet possessed something extraordinary. The young waitress felt a strange mix of nerves and freedom. She could feel every eye on her, yet she no longer felt the fear of judgment. The music carried her away, and the world around her faded. The grand chandeliers, the glittering glasses, the fancy dresses, all of it disappeared from her mind. There was only the piano, the notes, and the story she was telling through sound. Her fingers danced over the keys, moving faster and more confidently. The crowd could see that this was no beginner, no casual dabbling. This was someone who had lived and breathed music for years, hidden behind the walls of ordinary life. Their whispers turned into quiet gasps, some of admiration, some of disbelief. One elderly guest, sitting near the front, leaned forward in his chair. He had seen many performances in his lifetime, from grand concerts to private recitals, but he had never seen a performance like this. Every note was full of feeling, every pause full of meaning. The young waitress was not just playing the piano. She was telling her life story. The tempo changed, becoming slightly faster, but still controlled. It was a playful melody now, bright and energetic. A few of the guests smiled, caught up in the unexpected joy of the music. The laughter that had filled the room before had vanished completely. If anyone had doubted her before, those doubts were gone. She opened her eyes briefly, looking up at the crowd. Their expressions told her what she could feel already: shock, awe, and respect. Even the most arrogant of the wealthy guests could not hide their astonishment. For a moment she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She didn't need them to clap, she didn't need their approval, but it felt good to see that her talent could break through their prejudices. The melody slowed slightly, becoming more delicate again. She played with softness now, letting the notes linger in the air. It was almost as if the piano itself was breathing with her, creating a world that no one in the ballroom had expected. People leaned forward, some holding their hands together, others resting their heads lightly on their hands, lost in the music. The contrast was incredible. Just minutes ago, they had mocked her, laughed at her, and assumed she was nothing more than a simple waitress. And now, here she was, commanding the attention of the entire room, captivating their hearts without saying a single word. The young waitress could feel the shift. She had always known her music was powerful, but she had never played for such a crowd so ready to judge and so unprepared to be moved. And yet, the music had done what words never could. It silenced their doubts and opened their eyes to something extraordinary. As the final notes of the melody hung in the air, she let her hands rest gently on the keys. The room was silent for a heartbeat, as if no one dared to breathe. Then, slowly, a few guests began to clap, hesitant at first. Then more joined in, and soon the applause filled the room. But this was not the polite clapping of etiquette. It was the applause of genuine amazement, of people who had seen something incredible and could not stay quiet. She stood up from the piano, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and humility. She had not played for fame or attention, but for the music itself. Yet now she could see that her performance had made a difference, even if only for a moment. The crowd, once mocking and dismissive, now looked at her with respect and curiosity, and in that moment, she understood something important. Talent, truth, and passion could break through any barrier, no matter how high or imposing. She had come to the piano as a waitress, humble and quiet, and she had left as someone unforgettable. The room was quiet now, but the silence was no longer empty. It was full of anticipation, filled with the feeling that something extraordinary was happening. Every guest, even those who had been most skeptical, had stopped what they were doing to watch her at the piano. The laughter, the mocking whispers, and the judgment had vanished completely. She pressed the keys again, and this time the music grew deeper, richer, more emotional. It wasn't just notes on a piano anymore. It was a story being told without words. She played with passion that could be felt in every corner of the grand ballroom. The melody rose and fell like waves, each chord carrying her life, her struggles, her dreams. Some of the guests felt their hearts tighten. One woman clutched her hand to her chest, overcome with emotion, while a man near the back had to wipe away a tear he hadn't expected to shed. The music was not just beautiful. It was alive, full of life and truth, and everyone could feel it. The young waitress's fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys with a skill that seemed almost impossible. She didn't rush, but there was confidence in every motion, a sense that she was in complete control of the piano and the story she wanted to tell. Every note spoke of years of secret practice, of dedication that no one in this room had ever witnessed before. A few of the wealthiest guests, the ones who had laughed at her earlier, now leaned forward in their chairs, unable to hide their astonishment. Their eyes were wide, their mouths slightly open, and their hands resting lightly on the table, frozen. They had assumed she was just a simple waitress, someone ordinary and unremarkable. But now they were faced with the truth. Talent cannot be hidden forever, and in that moment, it shone brighter than anything else in the room. She shifted the music to a slower, more emotional tone, and the sound seemed to wrap around everyone like a warm blanket. It was soft, tender, and heartbreaking all at once. People held their breath as if they could hear every ounce of her experience in each note. The piano sang of long days spent working hard, of moments of loneliness, of dreams that had been kept secret for too long. From the corner of the room, an older gentleman, who had been particularly harsh in his earlier comments, now leaned forward with his hands clasped together. He had seen countless performances in his life, but none had moved him like this. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. He realized that he had underestimated her, judged her unfairly, and now all he could do was listen and admire. The music shifted again, becoming stronger, more powerful. It carried an energy that made the air vibrate with life. Some of the guests felt their hearts race, their minds caught in the rhythm of her playing. Even those who had been completely indifferent before now found themselves leaning closer, drawn in by something they could not explain. It was not just the technical skill that stunned them, it was the emotion behind it. Each note, each pause, each gentle touch of the keys carried her story, her feelings, her very soul. The piano was no longer an instrument in a corner of a ballroom. It had become a bridge between worlds, connecting her humble life with the lives of the rich and powerful in ways that words could never achieve. As the melody reached its peak, The young waitress closed her eyes again, letting the music carry her entirely. Her fingers moved with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing, yet there was a softness in every touch that made the music feel human, alive, and real. Every person in the room could feel it, even those who had come expecting to be entertained lightly or to judge her harshly. A few guests began whispering to each other, unable to hide their amazement. "Is she really a waitress?" one asked quietly, unable to believe what he was seeing. "She must have trained for years," another said, shaking his head in disbelief. They had assumed she was ordinary, but now they were discovering something extraordinary. Hidden in plain sight, the young waitress could sense the change in the room. She didn't need their recognition, but it was impossible not to notice it. The mocking smiles were gone, replaced by expressions of awe, respect, and wonder. She had come here to play from her heart, and now her music was reaching theirs. The melody slowed once more, becoming soft and lingering. It felt like the piano itself was breathing, like it was alive, responding to every emotion she poured into it. The room seemed to hold its breath, letting the last notes hang in the air as if afraid to break the spell. Every person present could feel the depth of what they had witnessed, a mixture of awe, admiration, and humility. Finally, she let her hands rest lightly on the keys, letting the silence fill the room for a moment. The audience could not speak. Some blinked rapidly, trying to process what they had just experienced. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then grew louder, more genuine, more heartfelt. This was not the polite clapping that happened out of obligation. This was the sound of people touched deeply, moved in a way they had not expected, and unable to remain silent. The young waitress stood slowly, her heart racing, but calm. She didn't look for recognition or praise. She had played because it was her truth, her passion, the one part of her life that was entirely hers. Yet, seeing the astonishment and admiration in their eyes, she realized something important. Talent, honesty, and dedication cannot be ignored forever. Even in the most unlikely places, greatness will shine through. For a moment, the room was filled with a strange mixture of emotions: awe, respect, humility, and even a little regret from those who had judged her too quickly. She smiled quietly to herself, not because of the applause, but because she knew she had shared something real, something that could not be taken away, something that had touched hearts and changed the way people saw her forever. And in that moment, it became clear the crowd that had laughed was no longer laughing. The wealthy, fancy audience who had doubted her, judged her, and underestimated her were now silent, captivated, and humbled by the power of her music. She had taken something ordinary herself, a simple waitress, and shown the extraordinary truth hidden inside. The applause that filled the room seemed endless. Hands clapped, some with hesitation at first, but soon it grew into genuine, heartfelt admiration. People were standing now, some even leaning forward, trying to get a better look at the young waitress who had completely transformed their evening with her music. The sound of clapping echoed off the chandeliers and walls, but for her it almost felt distant. She had played not for them but for herself, for the music that had been a part of her since she was a child. She stood up from the piano, her hands still tingling from the energy of the performance. Her uniform, simple and plain, seemed insignificant compared to the impression she had left on everyone in the room. Yet she felt no pride in the way the audience saw her. Her pride came from knowing that she had given everything she had to the music, and that in doing so, she had touched hearts. The wealthy guests who had once laughed at her now looked at her with a mix of respect, amazement, and humility. Some approached her quietly, hesitant, unsure of how to address her. I didn't expect—" one man began, his voice trailing off. Another shook his head slowly, unable to find the words. They had judged her before, dismissed her talent, and now they realized that appearances could be completely deceiving. One of the guests, a woman in an elegant gown, reached out to touch her hand. "You are incredible," she whispered. "I have never heard anything like that in my life." The young waitress smiled softly and nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. She thanked them quietly, keeping her voice humble, because for her, This wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the truth she had shared through the music. Some guests, still in disbelief, whispered to each other, "I can't believe she is a waitress." "And she plays like that," one said. "We judged her too quickly," another admitted. Their expressions had changed completely. The arrogance, the snobbery, and the assumptions that had filled the room before had disappeared. In their place was awe, humility, and respect. Even the staff, who had watched from the sidelines, looked at her with admiration. They had seen her every day, serving drinks, carrying trays, and quietly working hard. But now they understood something they hadn't seen before: the depth of her talent, the dedication she had poured into something she loved. Even when no one was watching, the young waitress walked slowly back to her duties, her head held high but her smile gentle. She returned to serving drinks and cleaning tables, moving among the guests with the same quiet humility she had always had. But something had changed. The way people looked at her had changed. The laughter and mockery were gone, replaced by curiosity, respect, and even a sense of wonder. A few guests approached her cautiously, asking questions about her training, her background, and how she had learned to play so beautifully. She answered softly, sharing a little about her journey without boasting. She explained that she had practiced quietly, for herself, for the love of music, and that the rest had come naturally over time. People listened, captivated by not just her music, but the story of her determination and perseverance. The evening continued, but the energy of the ballroom had shifted. The fancy crowd, once caught up in wealth, appearances, and judgment, had been humbled by something far more powerful: honesty, talent, and the courage to share it. The young waitress moved through the room, unnoticed by some, admired by others, but always herself. She did not need accolades to know her worth. The music had already proven it. By the end of the night, many guests left the ballroom with a new perspective. They had come expecting a glamorous evening filled with polite conversation and superficial entertainment. Instead, they had witnessed something genuine, something that reminded them that greatness can be found in the most unexpected places. They would remember her performance for a long time, not just because of the music, but because of the lesson it carried. Never judge someone by their appearance or their role, for hidden talents can surprise and inspire in ways that wealth and status never could. As she finally finished her shift and stepped outside into the cool night air, she felt a sense of peace. The city lights sparkled around her, but she was thinking of the music still lingering in her mind, the faces of the audience, the emotions she had seen reflected in their eyes. She realized that the world often underestimates people based on what they appear to be, and yet those people can hold extraordinary gifts within them. She walked home slowly, carrying the quiet joy that comes from sharing something real and meaningful. It didn't matter that she returned to her ordinary life, that tomorrow she would serve drinks and clean tables again. She knew that her talent was hers, unshakable and undeniable. She had shown a room full of people that passion, skill, and heart are far more important than status or wealth. And in that quiet night, as she looked up at the stars above, she understood the most important truth of all. Sometimes, the world only needs a single moment of courage, a single act of honesty to change how people see you forever. She had taken that moment, and it had transformed not only the audience, but herself as well. She smiled to herself, knowing that her story, her music, would live on, not just in the applause, but in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. Her life continued, simple and humble, but now it carried a new light, a light that reminded her and would remind anyone who heard her story, that greatness can come from anywhere, and that the smallest, quietest people can have the power to move the world in ways that no one expects. And with that thought, she disappeared into the night, a young waitress with a gift so extraordinary that even the fanciest, richest crowd would never forget the night she made the piano sing like no one had ever heard before.